Let me first of all say, if you weren't here last week, I really want to encourage you to go to the Refuge for All Sinners and Saints Facebook page and listen to the sermon from last week. And if you can't find that sermon and you're not friends with me, become my friend on Facebook, people. What is wrong? And you can listen to it there as well. It's on my personal Facebook.
What do you do on Facebook?
If you don't Facebook, come by the house and I'll just re-preach it again just to you. Seriously, Jim? Oh my gosh. Find somebody who has a computer and listen to it on Facebook.
I'm sure I can find it.
You think you can find somebody else? You've got teenagers. It'll be fine. So anyway, just please go back. That really, last week's message really kind of sets a tone and a vision for where we're looking to go in ministry here at the church, and we're going to kind of follow that up with a sermon tonight that is in Joshua chapter 6. And so we're going to kind of jump in, and then I'll connect the dots for you as we move into the rest of this. But Joshua chapter 6 is where we're going to be tonight. And this is one of the most well-known stories of the Bible. When you talk to people who maybe have been in church or haven't been in church, one story that almost everybody knows is Joshua and the walls of Jericho. I think that's pretty well known. Anyone not ever heard that story? And it's okay if you haven't. Okay, so most of us have. All right, so you're right on board with me. Now, unlike most other stories, here's what happens a lot of times when I start to look in Scripture and I start to prepare a message and I start to read the Scripture and I go, wow, this is not what they taught me in Sunday school. This has nothing to do with either the Sunday school version or the VeggieTales version, which, is not the same either. But this story, as I was reading the Scripture, I was like, hey, you know what? Sunday school version got it right. VeggieTales, not so much. Not quite, the whole slushy in the ear thing. It's a good one, though. Let me tell you, it's one of the best. Yeah, Kim likes that version better. I like slushies, so, it's good. But the Sunday school version really actually gets it right, which for me, as a pastor and as a geek, I'm kind of like, well, dang. Because, I'm the kind of person that really wants to say, okay, well then, here's the part you might not have known about this story. Here's what the Hebrew has to say and all that kind of stuff, because, it makes me feel good to be able to, bring out something new. But there's really not a whole lot more to say about this story other than what maybe you've already heard. But that doesn't mean that we can't learn something. It doesn't mean that we can't learn something from this story. And so, again, as we're reading through this, as we're talking through this, kind of approach it with new eyes. Kind of change your vision of it a little bit to kind of follow where I might be going with it tonight. So we're going to start off here with verse 1 of chapter 6. It says, "Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. And then the Lord said to Joshua, 'See, I have delivered Jericho into your hands along with its king and its fighting men.'" So in verse 1 here, Jericho is being portrayed as this impenetrable city. And it was. It was a very difficult city to get into if someone didn't want you to get into it. And, I always imagine, when I think about walled cities, especially in like a biblical sense or something like that, and again, VeggieTales maybe contribute to this, I think about flat ground and then a city with walls that are just kind of straight up in the air, and my thought process was always like, well, why didn't they just like throw rocks at them or something like that? Well, they didn't, because that's not the way the walls were built. The walls were built more like this. There were actually two walls. And we've learned this from archaeology as they've done digs at Jericho. We've learned that there were actually two walls. There was a wall that was closer to the city, this taller wall in the back, and it was about 30 feet tall. But that wasn't enough to make it a fortress. You see, then there was some land that was sloped. They took dirt and they built up a slope, and then they built another wall at the base of it. So from where the city is to where the armies would have been, you see the armies this is a really bad picture, but you kind of see the armies kind of hanging out right here. That wasn't all of them. There were more than 3. But they were far away from the city when they were marching around. They're going to march around here in a few minutes. And they were pretty far away. And so there wasn't really a way to attack them from there because, again, this is, early to late Bronze Age. Weapons were not what they are today. And so, they could have easily just walked around. But this is what the walls would have looked like. And that's difficult to get through. That's a difficult thing to try to conquer, is a city that's built with this kind of a fortress mentality. And so in verse 1, it says, hey, the city was walled and it was protected, and not only was it a fortress, not only was it this impenetrable fortress, it was also that they were on high alert. The city was also on high alert. No one was allowed to go in, no one was allowed to go out. Normally the gates would be open and people could come and go as they pleased. But because of the threat of the Israelites, the gates had been closed, and no one was going in, and no one was going out. The city was on very high alert. You've got a fortress city on high alert. And so then in verse 2, of course, God said, see the fortress city that is already on high alert? It's already yours. It's already yours. That's what God says to Joshua. Don't worry about it. You got this. It's already been delivered to you. The city of Jericho is yours. So, he could have probably just gone back to the tent and said, okay, I'll just wait for them to open the doors. And, God said it's mine, so I'll just wait for them to come out and say, hey, here you go, here's the keys to the city. No, that's not what happened, right? They had to make a strategy. There had to be a strategy for making come to pass what God said was going to come to pass. They had to start with some strategy. So the next several verses in chapter 6 are all about the strategy that they're going to employ in order to make good on what God said is already going to happen. And you have to remember that quite a bit of strategy has already taken place. If you were here last week or you've listened to the sermon, you'll remember that the story of Rahab, there was quite a bit of strategy that had already happened with the whole thing of sending the spies into Rahab. Now, last Sunday, Bruce Black was here, and he, after the sermon, came up to me and said, the whole thing about Rahab, about the spies going to the brothel and all of that kind of stuff, that was very strategic. And he's coming from, and help me out, FBI, Army, police, background. And so he knows a lot about strategy. And he was like, I could talk for just hours about how much strategy there was to the spies going to the brothel, because that's even the way they do it now. When we want information, those are the kind of places we go. And so there was a lot of strategy that had already gone into the conquering of Jericho with the story of Rahab. But now we're going to get even more strategy. So picking it up in verse 3, the strategy is march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. That's our strategy, folks. There it is, right there. So a little more about the city of Jericho. It really wasn't a huge city. A lot of people think of this sprawling city, but it was actually, the city itself was built on 6 acres. Now, to kind of get your mind wrapped around that, we have about 5 acres out here, okay? So 6 acres is not a whole lot of land. But when you added in the fortifications, that expanded to about 10 acres. So when you talk about going around the city, the circumference of the city, it was pretty big, about 2 miles, as I'll say in a few minutes. But the strength of Jericho here is not in its size, and it's not even in the amount of army that it has. Its strength is in the fact that they can withstand a siege. They were the kind of city that was built to withstand a siege. The walls were built to keep people out, but because of some other things, they could stay in. There was a natural spring that fed Jericho, so they would always have water. At this particular time, the harvest had just ended, and so they would have had plenty of food, and they would have stockpiled that food. So if they needed to survive a siege, they would have been able to survive it. And actually, archaeology really shows this to be true when they had done digs at the city of Jericho, at the site of Jericho. They have found all of these like baskets full of grain. Still there. from the time when it was destroyed. So their strength was in being able to withstand a siege. They were prepared. They would have been ready to sit inside and behind those walls for however long people wanted to walk around them. They would have been fine. They were prepared, and that was the strength of Jericho, was that it could withstand a siege. Now, a lap around Jericho, like I said, was about 2 miles. It's about 2 miles around the city. And Joshua's army has about 40,000 men. Now, they're not well trained. They don't have very many weapons, but there's a bunch of them. And I want you to think about that. Okay, so if you go to like a professional basketball game or something like that, there's between 35 and 40,000 people probably, okay? It's a lot of people. Now spread them out around 2 miles or so. It's still going to be a lot of people surrounding the city and marching around the city. And that was many, many, many more people than actually lived in Jericho itself. There was probably only about 10,000 people that lived in Jericho itself. So you're a person in Jericho, and you're standing up on your walls, and you've got food and you've got water, but then there are 40,000 people surrounding you. That's intimidating. That's a little intimidating. And so the strategy here, number one, was to just kind of be intimidating, to show a show of force. Part of it was just to be intimidating. That was part of the strategy. And some strategists actually imply, and I'm not so sure about this, but some strategists imply that the march itself might have been a diversion. Some strategists think that as they were marching around the city, they were also sneaking people up the scarlet cord that Rahab had put outside of her house. Because the Hebrew there, when it says put down a scarlet cord, it's not like a string. It's a big rope. A big rope. The Hebrew there implies that the scarlet rope, or the scarlet cord that they asked her to hang outside her window, was actually a big rope. And so some strategists believe that the march itself was an intimidation factor, but it was also a diversion so that they could sneak people into Rahab's house and they could have people on the inside. Could be. I don't know. Might. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe. Could be. Just a little thing I threw out there. Something that I learned while I was studying. I want you guys to know, just because, thank you, just because this is, the Sunday school version of the story, I want you to know I still put a little effort into this. I did a little research. Could be. I don't know. All right, let's carry on. So on the 7th day, march around, here's the second part of the strategy. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. And when you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpet, have the whole army give a loud shout. So on the 7th day, the strategy was a little bit different. The first day, or the first 6 days, it was just walk around the city with all of your people and be intimidating or be a diversion or whatever, just one time. But on the 7th day, I want you to go around 7 times. And you have to know that the people who are up on the wall, they're like, okay, there they are again. Okay, they're going to go around once, and then they're going to go back to their tents. Oh, wait a minute, they're going around again. And they're going around again, and they're going around again. So you've got to know that anxiety is probably starting to build in the people of Jericho that are watching this. And so they go around 7 times, and then after the 7th time, then they give a loud blow of the horn. And to this point, the army has been completely quiet. The horns have been blowing every day, but the army had been quiet. And so the silent army now just goes nuts. 40,000 people going nuts. That's loud. Again, that's intimidating. And that's the strategy. That's it. That's it. March around the city, either to be a diversion or intimidating factor, once for 6 days, and then on the 7th day, go around 7 days, and then I want you to just yell. What do y'all think? Good strategy? Yeah, I mean, that's not the way I would have done it. That's probably, I probably would have been, well, somebody figure out some kind of siege weapon, okay? It might be a little early in history for siege weapons, but somebody needs to figure out a siege weapon. We need to hit them with stuff. We need to throw things at them. I don't know what we need to do. We need to do something, but that wouldn't have been my strategy, but that was it. That was all. That was the whole strategy in a nutshell. Just march. And make noise. And maybe you're going to sneak some people in, but, not that many. You're kind of noticeable. That was it. That was the whole strategy. But Joshua says, okay. And so Joshua, son of Nun, called the priests and said to them, take up the ark of the covenant of the Lord, and have 7 priests carry trumpets in front of it. And he ordered the army, advance, march around the city with an armed guard, going ahead of the ark of the Lord. And when Joshua had spoken to the people, the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets before the Lord went forward, blowing their trumpets, and the ark of the Lord's covenant followed them. The armed guard marched ahead of the priests, who blew their trumpets, and the rear guard followed the ark. All this time the trumpets were sounding. Now, what's at the center of the procession? The Ark of the Covenant, that's right. In the center is the Ark of the Covenant, and then there's armed guards, and then there's armed guards. Okay, well, what's the Ark of the Covenant? A lot of times when we're talking Bible stuff and you hear the word ark, you think big boat. Okay, so they've got this big boat that they're carrying around. Okay, that changes everything. I mean, obviously, that's going to be like, what are they doing? They've got a boat. They're marching it around. It's not a boat. An ark is actually just a container. That's all it is. Ark of the Covenant, okay. Indiana Jones people, yeah, okay. So the Ark of the Covenant, basically what that was a golden box that contained artifacts from the Exodus. Inside of the Ark of the Covenant were the tablets that contained the 10 Commandments. There was some manna left over from when they were in the wilderness. And there was also Aaron, who was Moses' brother's rod, which was used a lot whenever they would do miracles. And so there were artifacts in there. But it wasn't just that. There was a symbolic presence of God. The ark to the people was the symbolic presence of God amongst them. And so they would follow the ark. And they would look to the ark. That was kind of their cue as to God being with them. And it also had some pretty mysterious power. It was a mysterious thing. You couldn't touch it. It had little loops on the side of it, and they would slide poles into the loops so that they could pick it up on the poles, because if you touched it, you died. It had some mysterious power. Later on, as we go throughout the scriptures, if you keep reading in like Judges, there was another army that captured it one time, and they're like, cool, we're going to take it home. And so they took it home, and everybody in the town got cancer and died. And so they said, well, let's take it to another place. And then everybody there, they got overrun with rats and things like that. And so seriously, this is in the Bible, people, seriously. And so they finally took it back. They're like, we don't know what that thing is, but get it out of here. It's crazy. And so it was the presence of God, it was the power of God, and it was right in the middle of this whole strategy. Central to this strategy. Moving on to 15th, okay, so, verse 15. So here we are, it's the 7th day, and here's what happened on the 7th day. They got up at daybreak and marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on that day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet blast, Joshua commanded the army, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. And the walls came down. That's the way the story goes. Now, how? I mean, all these guys did was shout, right? How did the walls come down? I have no idea. Can I just say that? I have no idea how the walls came down. I don't know. I wasn't there. I have no idea. It could have been an earthquake that God caused. It could have just been the marching, I don't know, just kind of shook the place up. I don't know. It could have been an earthquake. It could have been that they'd snuck agents in and there was a sneak attack and they took over they were able to overrun the guards that were guarding the door, and then the 40,000 people came through and just took care of everything. I don't know. Maybe that's how it happened. I don't know. But for me, the how doesn't matter. What matters to me is that God said, do this. This is going to happen. And it did. To me, it doesn't matter how. It doesn't matter. The walls came down. And the rest doesn't really matter to me. But what can we learn from this? What does this have to do with us? Well, we talked a lot last week about going after a few unreached groups. We listed a few unreached groups that are out there that are in a lot of cases, dying for something, literally dying for something, to be a part of something, to be a part of something larger. And we said, well, why not? Why is nobody going after these people? We're going to go after them. But there are big walls around these groups. Let me show you the 4 groups that we talked about, plus a couple of others that, weren't very dramatic, but we still need to go after them. And so I put them on here. Let's see, that's for something else. Here's the first one. That's probably the biggest one, right? There's a whole community out there that has been shut out of the church and is looking for something. Why not us? Why not us? So that's one group that I think that we should be going after. Here's another one, non-believers. And again, I said this might be the most radical one of all. And I said, in this town, and it's true of a lot of other towns too, that basically churches get big and get small, not because they are making little Christians and making Christians that get big and then get small, because a lot of people go to one church and then they all get mad, and they go to another church and then another church gets big, and then they get mad there, and then it gets small again, and then another church gets big. Who's going after non-believers? I think we should. Another group, young adults, college students. Here we are right across the street from the college. Again, churches, although, hey, let me tell you, we got some young adults here, and I'm so happy to see young adults, but I'd like to have more. I mean, heck, we're right across the street from the 3rd largest college in New Mexico. We could use a few more young adults, and no one seems to be going after them. Another group, addicts. We talked about addicts last week, and I've told you some of my favorite people in the world are recovering addicts. And they have got lots to teach us about spirituality, let me tell you. I learn more from my friends who are addicts than I sometimes ever do in church. Because these people know how to live and depend on God every single day. So, addicts, I want more and more addicts to be a part of this community. And then there were 2 others that I didn't mention because they're not controversial, but we sure need them. We need youth. We need a ministry. We need a strategy for youth. And we need a strategy for children, more than just, me trying to pimp out my son by saying, hey, don't you want to play with a really awesome kid? We need more of a strategy for reaching and ministering to children. We need strategies for all of these. The one that I didn't turn around, by the way, is ethos. Our ethos. We need a truth, and we'll talk about this one a little bit more later. We talked about a truth and an ethos last week, and we need to develop one. But all of these groups have pretty big walls around them. Sometimes it's walls that they've put up. Sometimes it's walls that we've put up. But all of these groups have big walls around them. And so what do? Here we are. We're standing outside here saying, I think we're supposed to go in there. I think we're supposed to make a difference. But there's these walls. So what do? Well, we need a strategy. We need a strategy. Just like God gave Joshua a strategy, we need a strategy for each of these groups. We need to be able to say, okay, what's our strategy for reaching this group? What's our strategy for reaching this group? And it's going to be different for each of them. We need a strategy for each group. Now, I've been a part of many strategic plans in the past. Isn't that right, Kyle? I've been a part of a lot of strategic plans in the past. I've seen them come and go. And quite frankly, most went nowhere. Most went nowhere.
On the shelf.
On the shelf. That's right. We make all this effort and we make all these plans, and then they are just there until the next time we decide to make a plan. Well, why? I think in the center of our strategy must be the power of God. In the center of the strategy that was given to Joshua was the Ark of the Covenant. In the center of the strategy, whatever it is, there's got to be the power of God, because these walls don't come down on their own. And sometimes they don't come down just because we want them to, or just because we've got a plan. God has to bring down these walls. With us working. But it's got to be the power of God. And so here's what I am asking for. Here's what I think we need. We need task force / prayer force for each of these identified groups. I need people who are going to say, you know what? Either I know something about young adults. Angie and I were having a conversation earlier. Angie works at the college. Angie's an in, people. If I don't see Angie's name on that list, I'm just going to go ballistic. I'm just saying. Just saying.
I want to be the youth because I think I represent. Okay, no, that ship has sailed.
We'll talk
college.
about that. But I want a task force. I'm going to ask you at the end of the service to come up here and write your name on one of these lists. Which one do you think that you might be able to have a part with? But I don't want these groups just to be task force where we make plans. I want them to be prayer forces. I want these groups to be groups that get together and pray about not only what are we going to do, but praying for these groups and praying for us to be ready to deal with these groups. And so at the center of our strategy has to be the power of God. Because we can break down walls like Joshua did with strategy and power of God. How? I have no idea. I have no idea. That's why my name is not on any of these lists at this point, because I don't have the answer. I don't know yet. Maybe one of you do. And maybe when we start getting together and talking about these things, and this person says, well, I have this in, and I have this in, and I have this knowledge, and I have this talent, and I have this ability, and then we start putting that together and covering it in prayer, maybe something will happen. How? I have no idea. But I do have faith. I do have faith. And you know, Joshua could have said, God, this whole marching around the city and making noise strategy doesn't sound great. How about this one? Because I don't think that one's going to work. I've got faith. I've got faith that these are walls that need to come down. I believe that the people who can help them come down are in this congregation. And I've got faith in the power of God, in an unstoppable God that doesn't let walls stop him.